Toronto. It's a 3-year initiative, and what we're doing here is emphasizing questions of power, social justice, and critical theory in making and analyzing digital technologies and historical perspective. So we have a vision of DH that places accessible, anti-racist, decolonial, feminist, and queer, trans, non-binary work at its core. And we understand our current historic shift in digital technology as an opportunity for social and political transformation. We foreground projects that focus on creative praxis, co-creation, public engagement, digital archives, community-based research. And we offer fellowships to graduate students, undergraduate students. We hold postdoctoral fellows. We provide seed funding and other research support to faculty researchers. We provide training, critical DH methods and tools, and we host a wide range of events, including today's event. So to learn more about us, please visit our website, dhn.utoronto.ca. We'll put that in the chat. And for those of you on Twitter, we'd love to hear your thoughts about Professor Treharne's research, and we'll be tweeting about the event and hope that you will too. Add your voice. You can tag us at U of T DHN, as long as we're using Twitter, which I guess we are today. Who knows what will be happening in the near future, or use the hashtag CDHI talks. So we're very, very fortunate to be joined today by two brilliant critical DH scholars. Dr. Elaine Treharne is joining us from Stanford University, and Dr. Jim Ginther from the University of Toronto, who we are hoping will be introduced.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. Oh, so Jim's not here yet. We're having a little sort of back-end technology aspects, but Jim will be joining us shortly. I think I'll go ahead and introduce him anyway. And if he hasn't joined, then I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for today as well. But Jim, when he joins us, will be taking over as the moderator for the Q&A afterwards. So Dr. James Ginther is Associate Director of the Center for Medieval Studies here at the University of Toronto, and he's former Dean of the Faculty of Theology at the U of T. He is a medieval historian and a professor of church history, and he works primarily in 12th and 13th century European theology. His research focuses on biblical exegesis and the relationship between the study of the natural world and theological discourse. He's currently leading a SSHRC-funded project, Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and that produces an edition of Stephen Langton's lectures on Genesis. He teaches courses in church history and in medieval church history, Anselm of Canterbury, the medieval theology of creation, and methods in historical theology. And he's also, as many of you know, has been working in the field of DH for over the last 20 years or so. He's collaborated on several large projects, including the digital tool T-Pen, transcription for paleographical and editorial notation. So Jim was going to introduce our speaker for today, but since we're not yet here, I will go ahead and do so, although I wish he was here because I know that Elaine and Jim have chatted and he probably has something very special to share. Hopefully we'll be able to do that later. So Elaine Treharne is a Senior Associate Vice-Provost for Undergraduate Education, as well as the Roberta Bowman Denning Professor of Humanities and Professor of English at Stanford University, where she teaches manuscript and archival studies and early British literatures. She co-directs Stanford Manuscript Sciences, and she's currently working on the 4th edition of Old and Middle English and Anthology with Wiley Blackwell in 2023, as well as a revised edition of Neil Kerr's Catalog of Manuscripts containing Early English. Her most recent books include Perceptions of Medieval Manuscripts, the Phenomenal Book, Oxford University Press, 2021, and with Orietta Dalrold, the Cambridge Companion to British Medieval Manuscripts from Cambridge in 2020. So it's my great pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Elaine, who will share her current thoughts with you today.
Thank you. Thanks, you can hear me. I'm sure you'll let me know if you can't hear me. Thanks to everybody for turning up. I know it's quite late for some of you across the Atlantic or elsewhere. Of course, it's lunchtime here, and I'm foregoing that in order to spend some time with you. I'm very glad to have been asked to do this. It's week 7 of our quarter, so it's been a bit of a harum scarum to get ready for this today. And I have tried rather, what's the word? Foolishly, that's the word, to put all of the things into this slideshow. So I'm going to be like a flat stone skimming across the water of manuscript studies and digital humanities. And I'm going to mention lots of projects as we go, and anything, obviously just put anything in chat if there's something needs further elaboration, or just email me. That would be absolutely fine too. And I'll talk for possibly sort of 40-45 minutes, but I do have a mountain of slides, so I will try and not dwell on any one of them in particular. And something that I just want to say about my title, so really kind of giving the game away before I get started, is, you know, the large digital projects that I've been engaged in with collaborators for the last 17 years do not in any way, could not in any way, I think, supplant the eye to image human kind of effort that really requires the interpretation of the information and data that we draw out of these various projects. And I think that will become clear. So this may seem a bit of a okay, share screen will stop other computers sound share. So I'm going to continue. That just came up. I've never seen that on Zoom before. I'm just going to continue and hope that
Totally fine. Sorry about that.
it's okay. Okay, so hopefully you can all see. Can I have a thumbs up from anybody?
We can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so this ostentatious title of New Directions in Manuscript Studies makes it sound like I know what those are. Of course I don't. But hopefully we can have a discussion about these things. And as I kind of get going through this slideshow, we normally do thanks at the end, but with this kind of work, the thanks at the end does not serve at all. So these are some of my collaborators and people I'm conversing with in such a way, particularly Ben Albritton, Mark Algie Hewitt, Stuart Brooks, Orietta de Rold, Mateusz Fafinski, Eren Jurek. I talk to these colleagues so regularly that it's difficult to kind of untangle kind of I can't overemphasize really my debt to them. And I think this is part of DH work, right? It's got to be collaborative, and the results are far better for it. And of course that's even more important as we go on now with new modes of thinking about manuscript studies. So I'm really grateful to all of my colleagues. So what I'm going to talk about today is I've thought about how to kind of put things into buckets to categorize the sorts of things that I want to cover and to think about. And as an Old English specialist, I of course function entirely through alliteration. So I'm thinking about expanding, enhancing, extracting, exploring, and exchanging, or exchange, as ways to consider our digital environment and digital capability. And these sort of, not really, but sort of map onto terms that we're much more used to when we're in the DH landscape, words like accessibility or interoperability or discoverability. And so it's just a different way of kind of thinking about these really significant facets of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to start obviously with expanding the archive, and in ways that are both obvious and urgent. And so when we think about expanding the archive, and this is an image from Bhutan, in his most recent work on racism, technological escalation and climate catastrophe, Achille Mbembe warns against the danger of, and I quote, computational capitalism threatening to turn life itself into a commodity. His call to counter this through humanistic pedagogy and a rejection of techno-positivism is centered on the expansion of the archive, away from Eurocentricity and towards the incorporation of the world's archives. One must, he says, read other cultures' records to humanize the world's curriculum. Now, this call, a very recent call from Mbembe, takes me back, of course, to the work of Gayatri Spivak and Fanon Baba and other foundational figures in the understanding of the bias and the Orientalism of the human record as it's been viewed until fairly recently in Western scholarship. And it also reminds me of the significance of collaborative endeavors, because short of learning whole new writing systems, and I am struggling with Chinese on Duolingo, so I'll just put that there. But other than learning whole new writing systems and languages, the expansion of the record or the archive or of manuscript studies can only happen with respectful conversation and frequent encounter. And I think that for most people here, that would be kind of really the sort of where we are at the minute. And so that plays out in multiple ways in my own research. I have an exhibition here at Stanford in Green Library called The Handmade Book, and we talk about book as technology, book as process, book as body, book as relic, book as trauma, 18 cases of a kind of metaphoricizing bookness. And of course, we've worked with Chinese materials, with Islamic materials, with palm leaf, Sanskrit, Southeast Asian materials, to try and draw attention of those who come to visit the exhibition or who read the book that accompanies it, try and draw attention to this idea of expanding the archive. And perhaps it's less about expanding the archive or record than it is about creating some form of redress, equilibrium of knowledge sources where that's possible. And so, you know, this is another small, very small palm-sized codex that we have on exhibition. It's a probably late 19th century Gaze prayer book. And these things are just to say, because there's a whole sort of area of the online world, just to say that where one used to be able to buy large fragments or complete codices of Western materials until perhaps even the last decade. Now the book trade has shifted because of the scarcity of those resources, has shifted to, you know, I don't, should I say the word, okay, I'm going to say plundering or putting online the cultural record of from a kind of global perspective. So to be very sort of alert to that. But there is really fantastic work that has been done for decades on non-Western materials, and Western scholars are just kind of turning their attention to this as well. But there are other materials too, of course, again on a global in a global sense, that don't always get included in the stories. And I think that one of the people responsible for this is here on the call. And I don't know, I hope all of you can tell me what this is if I were to do a little quiz. Recently, of course, this is from the National Archives KB 145/3/7 from 1383 to 84. This was the discovery through the careful scrutiny of diplomata and bureaucratic documentation from the High Middle Ages, the discovery by Ewan Roger and Sebastian Sebecki of additional information about Geoffrey Chaucer and Cecily Champagne that hit the headlines in a really quite remarkable way about a month ago now. It's been published also in the Chaucer Review. And Ewan Roger and Sebastian Sebecki, Sebastian, through asking the questions and collaborating with Ewan, brought to the fore this material in a way that Andrew Prescott in the UK at the University of Glasgow has been asking us to do for years, that there are millions of documents, rolls, single leaf documents, and this is again kind of true on a physically, topographically global scale, that have not ever really been looked at in perhaps as many as, in this case, sort of 600 years. And it's new findings that can be made in these administrative documents, perhaps in a way that certainly literary scholars might pay more attention to now, but have not really been thoroughly scrutinizing. And this, in a way, again, kind of creates, it's about the expansion of the archive, which is one of the new directions that I'm talking about, but also really highlights the absolute necessity of the appreciation of the scholarship of our archival and library colleagues, so librarians, archivists, and museum specialists, and also the urgency of making this material accessible. And accessibility is linked certainly to the expansion of the archive. But again, we must ask, what is accessibility? Who can access it? And in what form can they access this material, physically or digitally? but also with what skill sets must one approach these, in this case in particular, incredibly difficult material for the non-specialist. So it's all very well, it's all very well putting more and more online, and there are many who advocate that that's really what we should be focusing on, is getting this stuff out there. Who's going to read it? Who has the skill sets to read it? How many of us are still in the position of being able to teach rare languages and paleography and other really vital skill sets? But accessibility comes in a different form when we think about what's available, again, probably really on a local level, because very many, certainly university libraries and also long founded public libraries, other private kinds of institutions have material that is still in need of scrutiny by scholars, but also that others can go and look at and get a kind of taste of what it means to work with manuscripts. There's no substitute for working with the physical objects, but I won't dwell too much on that. But it doesn't have to be a Chaucer manuscript. You don't have to go to the Huntington or whatever. It doesn't have to be a codex. Diplomata like this charter from Cabourn in Lincolnshire. We have a small collection of these charters that all belong to the same collection here in Stanford's Green Library. They're widely available and in the oddest of places too. So, for example, in Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, it's a late 19th century cathedral. It has a sequence of biblical materials in the ambulatory of the apse, and they're all fragments, some of them from the Otto Eggy collection, that very famous sort of bookbreaker, early 20th century bookbreaker. And they're just framed and on the wall. So these materials, whether they're whole materials like this one in front of you, this single leaf charter, or whether they're fragmented materials, are obviously spread around collections, spread around institutions and in collections all over the place. And some of these are accessible to interested participants and viewers. So thinking then about fragments, talking about new directions in manuscript studies, I hardly need to say, I think of the work of Ben Albritton and Lisa Fagin Davis, among many others, Eric Johnson and so on, who are really bringing to the fore the new field of fragmentology. In fact, there is a new journal, a newish journal called Fragmentology. There'll be a volume of digital philology out in March, which Ben Albritton, Mateusz Fifiński, and a number of other colleagues have edited. And it's devoted to this issue of fragmentology. And this is, this is a way in which I think that a lot of new scholarship is going to be focused, is not necessarily privileging, because in relation to CDHI's mission of issues to do with digital humanities and power, something that really interests me is the fragmentary, the kind of the ruin, if you like, but also the idea of the mediocre or the mundane. And I'm going to return to that. Not so much the prioritized or the privileged treasures of the libraries that have had so much attention for the last couple of centuries, but actually material that one could think of as really fairly quotidian. And I don't know if you know the story. This was a book of hours. This is the very thing itself here. It was complete in 2010 when it was sold by Christie's to an art dealer in Germany, who within the next couple of years split it up into individual leaves and sold them on eBay. And I just managed to acquire a leaf from this that was sold on and on and on to another book dealer. I actually know that book dealer. I managed to get that from him. I had to pay for it because it belongs in this little manuscript. But this material, these fragments and studying material like this, which one could kind of think of as kind of quotidian, I think is something that has become really an attractive and productive part of manuscript studies right now. And of course, a lot of that can comfortably be done online. A lot of these fragments are digitized, and in effect, you can physically be complete work on a fragment far more easily than one could on a codex, and especially from a distance. So this is a book that was brutalized, broken. These are not protected by law. Books are not considered works of art, which is just ridiculous. And so this, I managed to kind of acquire the scraps of this book, if you like, and have written about it in my most recent book for OUP. Wholeness, which is really the perception of the medieval manuscript, is all about the wholeness of the book. And it's so this is again about kind of enhancing the record and issues to do with discoverability. And I don't necessarily mean discoverability through the ease of access to metadata. I mean discoverability in terms of the understanding of the wholeness of the book and the way that the book was produced, received and transmitted through time. So the phenomenology of the book allows us to conceive of the book in the real world as it is encountered by others, and as it is itself represents what Merleau-Ponty, a French philosopher that I work with, I work with his writings, would talk about as being inhabited. So we talk about this as being an inhabited object. So when I work on manuscripts, whether they're in the digital realm or in the physical realm, and of course through the pandemic, it was entirely thanks to the digitizers that I was able to do any research on these primary sources at all. But I am really kind of focused on this idea of the wholeness of the book. And I'm also focused on that which cannot be seen, and in fact, which is really difficult to describe. So issues to do with doxa, or sort of joy, right? And poiesis, the intentionality behind the creation of the object, techne, so the skill set, the know-how by which the object was created, and the kind of inherent spirituality or potential joy that comes from working with these. How can we deduce this material, deduce this kind of aspect of the book's materiality and immateriality? And so in this sense of enhancing the record and thinking about these objects as wholes, and also considering what we cannot see, let me just talk to you about Lloyd Reynolds's. Let me read Lloyd Reynolds's quotation to you, which is just absolutely glorious. He says, "We begin with a rectangle of paper or vellum or any other substrate. It's empty. It's a no thing awaiting the pen, and it's not even empty space, but only potential. But the moment the pen touches the paper and leaves even a slight trace of ink, the paper does become space, and the boundaries of the area are awakened and respond across the space to the tash of ink. It's as if a magnetic field was suddenly activated, and each subsequent stroke pours added energy into the field, modifying all previous relationships within its edges." And this really evocative and, I think, inspiring way of understanding an object and an object as substrate, that upon which words or images, whatever, can be inscribed, is as good for graffiti or tattoo as it is for manuscripts or silk books. It's a wonderful kind of way to recognize the presence of what appears to be empty or absent. And so it's about including everything in our descriptions. And I don't know for how long empty blank folios have been included in the digitizing of an object. I think it's probably at least a decade, but there was a time when those materials were not included. And so blankness, or that which has not yet reached its potential in terms of the wholeness of the book, really is profoundly interesting to me. And it takes me back to this idea of the global record, the expansion of the record, and new directions in manuscript studies that see us bringing together traditions across time and space. And there's a lot more comparative work happening now, I think, than has ever been the case. And for some fields, obviously, comparative studies, that has always been what they do. But there's so much more work and attention and sensitivity being put into this kind of global approach, respectful global approach to manuscript studies. And it brings me to Stanford Text Technologies project called East-West Text Technologies. We have run 2 out of 3 workshops so far, one in Beijing, one in Shanghai, and the final one will be possibly in Taipei, where we brought together Western and Chinese sinologists from the Tang and Song dynasties, or the sort of 4th and 5th centuries up to about sort of 1500. So we had scholars crossing that chronology, talking about different traditions to see ways in which one could learn from these different traditions. And, you know, because so I gave a paper on Chinese calligraphy. Well, it was just on calligraphy, actually, but it was on looking at both the East and the Eastern and Western traditions. And the Eastern tradition of, which is really very early comment on Li Bai by Zhang Nian, talks about Li Bai seeing his calligraphy as flowing from the heart. And its wonders are way beyond the realm of this mundane world. And the way in which calligraphy is discussed in the Chinese context, the East Asian context, in relation to how it's discussed in the sort of later Western tradition from about maybe the 8th century up to the 15th, is remarkably different. And that's as far as our record goes. And so then one wonders about what you can capture of scribal activity in the Western tradition if you acknowledge that some of this aspect of sort of spirituality or heartfeltness would have been present for those scribes. And I think then of something like the Exeter book from 970. So roughly, not really contiguous with what I've just shown you, but, you know, in that pre-1000 context, AD, the Exeter book, where we have this wonderful riddle about writing. I saw 4 things artfully travelling in unison, dark with a track, swerta weran lasta, swathus with the blacku. Swift was on fore, fullum framere, flag on lufte, deaf under uther. And then the hand is the fighting warrior working restlessly and prescribing the way for the letters, or possibly, you know, even something that goes beyond that in terms of the tools of the scribe. And so this here, the substrate, right, is absent until we hear about the beaten gold in the last line, and we have to imagine the blankness of the substrate that is suddenly rendered visible, as in Reynolds's wonderful kind of evocative quotation, rendered visible by the inscription upon it. And so similarly, you know, paying attention to the wholeness of the object and often seeing what's written as if it were emerging from the whiteness of the or the kind of paleness, and certainly in the case of some of our materials on deerskin, for example, of really quite kind of darker substrate, seeing what kind of emerges from that and thinking less in a text fixated way, I think is one of the most positive ways that we can move forward and in new directions for manuscript studies. This is obviously a particularly great example of the blankness of the book, Nihil Deist, nothing is missing. They let us know, the compiler lets us know. So the phenomenal approach to the book insists on all of the book, the blankness, the text, the marginalia, the sewing, the binding structure, etc., the pricks, the rulings, as being of fundamental significance for the interpretability of the object. And we can expand knowledge of the physical objects by then moving away from the dominance of text and from the urge, which is everywhere now, I think, to replace image with text. So automated transcription, so that we can churn out texts that, again, you know, that's not sufficient for the majority of manuscript scholars would be working with these early materials and requiring translations for the texts. And I'm thinking particularly, of course, of our scholars, our undergraduates and our graduates who need all of that kind of help in order to really gain the full potential of the object. So in conversations with Andrew Prescott, you know, he has inspired me to realize that in fact we could in fact work now straight from image, I think, and here, you know, Jim's work on T-Pen becomes critical, as with other annotation tools, and particularly annotation tools that can be saved and subsequently used and analyzed in different ways and form, in a sense, metadata or categories of metadata in their own right. If we could move straight from image, that kind of intermediate stage of feeling that we have to present editions of this material, I think, is something we might want to think about getting away from. But even when we're looking at the whole book and we're thinking about the whole book, data is always missing. And so enhancing manuscript studies or issues to do with discoverability are absolutely critical in the way that we move forward now in the next couple of decades, I suspect. So discoverability comes in all kinds of different ways, and it can come from working with multiple repositories, from the Schoenberg repository of manuscripts to the British Library's repository to Walter's Art Gallery to, you know, wherever you are. And I mean, these are just American and British ones I've talked about, but obviously these repositories are throughout the world with very different standards of metadata, very different ideas of what constitutes essential metadata. And one of the projects that I ran, Cybertext, was looking at data across time and space to work out if we could compare, for example, a Babylonian cuneiform tablet to an iPad tablet. Is there a way in which one can talk about these things in terms of their attributes, the details of them, not just in terms of tablet technologies, but actually what does that mean and what are the most significant components of that? And it proved very, very difficult to do. We spent the best part of the grant, which was only a year long. In fact, we spent more than that year creating structured data and cleaning up data that between repositories of digitized and described objects. So acknowledging categories of missing data then is really important across time and across space, but also I think, and something that I'm working on, I'll come to this in just a minute, is the missing data that is a legacy absence, as I've decided to term it, the absence of women in the record, particularly pre-1600, the way in which biases, as we well know, biases are built into data. Now, that can be data that was gathered by early paleographers as they made their way through thousands of manuscripts in their lifetimes with a pencil and a notebook and a pipe. Or it can be legacy absence that has come about through the construction of metadata or databases that we're all using, where possibilities for modes and personnel behind the production of manuscripts just are not included, so that it's really incredibly difficult to find within in the record. And this happens to be the thing I'm working on at the moment, but there are many different kinds of absences. And of course, there are far more willful and power structured absences in recent centuries as a result of colonialism and the oppression and destruction of archives throughout the world in countries that have been brutalized by colonists. So this legacy absence is really important. And in addition to what is missing, you know, when we're in terms of discoverability and enhancing manuscript studies, a significant focus really must surely be on linked data. And a really good project that's just got underway, funded by the Irish Council, is Dr. Mark Faulkner's Seara Bend linked data project. So he is taking 15 major digital resources, some of which no longer function, but he has the data for them. And he is building a kind of conglomerative database that will provide linked data so that you can move between long-standing corpora projects, long-standing spelling projects, long-standing cataloging projects. And it's ambitious, and it's going to be very interesting to see what Mark is able to do with his team, because it may very well be a sort of flagship effort for this kind of work as we move forward. Discoverability is such a major issue of the work that we do. So in terms of like missing data, one of the things also that I really, if you ever see me talking again in the next sort of 5 years, this will be the thing I'm still talking about, is the need to move away from data that is missing as a result of the data that's supplied. I don't know how else to sort of phrase it. So that if you look at this book, for example, in sort of standard essays or repository information, you might read about it being described as the scruffy little book. The aesthetic that has been used by paleographers and manuscript scholars to date, and is still being used in some cases, of scruffiness or untidiness or irregularity, is quite damaging to the object, given that we are such an aesthetically impelled and connoisseurial, hierarchized kind of bunch of people as we go about our work as manuscript scholars. I think there's still, there's so much emphasis on things like, I don't know, let's just say, oh, no, I'm not going to say that manuscript. I don't know, think of a famous manuscript, the Luttrell Psalter, as opposed to what has been derogatorily and quite erroneously described in this case as a scruffy little book. And it makes me wonder if you work on mundane, and I don't mean that there's no value judgment there. If you work on the mundane, the everyday, as this book may have sort of been, if others view it as scruffy or untidy or irregular or ugly, if that somehow kind of demotes your scholarship in relation to these hierarchies that we privilege. So all of this work then, Text Technologies' is work on closing the gaps of time and space, and can we model, can we do things despite missing data, is as a result of seeing these objects as whole, and using this model that's in front of you at the bottom here of intentionality, materiality, and functionality plus or minus cultural value as the descriptor for every single. You can use this model for describing every textual object. And in that way, you can bring manuscripts into conversation with foldable phones, of course, wax tablets, and all the rest of it, to bridge temporal and spatial divides, and to begin new projects like that of extracting. So this is, I think we're on number 4 now. Are we number 4, number 3, number 4? So extracting, which is about kind of intelligibility. And by intelligibility, I mean our ability to understand the composition and the production of manuscripts, what went into those. In my case, I'm really interested in the 12th and 13th centuries. In the 12th century, we see this kind of wholesale emergence of new features of manuscript production, for example, running headers, the introduction of the paragraphos, things that modern books are completely dependent on in terms of making the text and the image intelligible to the reader. So the ability to automate the extraction of features of production of any textual corpora is really exciting, and we're quite advanced. Are we? I don't know. Is that? No, maybe not advanced. We're getting along with that now. And I've run a couple of projects with my colleagues, Ben Albritton and Mateusz Fafinski, and Mark Algy-Hewitt, to kind of automate the way that we can think about manuscripts, information retrieval tools. And one of the things that we did was global currents, and some of you have seen these kinds of things before. I'm very interested in blankness, as I think is probably already evident. And so we were able to extract blank spaces. I think that's really exciting. I'm not quite sure what we kind of do with that, but it's interesting to see how the computer program, the algorithm, is able to extract space, which allows us to see, for example, the way that textual items are noted, are demarcated in various different codices, if there are emergences of particular kinds of practices, which of course they are. And in this case, these blank spaces all correspond to this extraordinary page from one of the great Bibles, I think possibly Corpus Christi College, Cambridge 2. I haven't made a note of that, for which I apologize. But the way that we can extract spaces, and then what the algorithm considers a space. It's really interesting that it is able to detect a space even in many cases where there is offsetting from the writing on the back of the membrane. And it does make mistakes, as you can see at the bottom, and particularly when the ink is not black. So that's just really interesting. We with the Global Currents project, again, which many of you will have heard me talk about before, and which is sort of still rumbling on, because we had money from the NEH for this, and it was a collaborative project with colleagues at the University of McGill and European universities. And by the time we had kind of even produced the training data, we had run out of time. And so we got this huge data set back, and we are still in the process of considering the best ways to utilize it. So one of the questions that we asked and that emerged from that is how is big data changing the research landscape for the humanities, and what kinds of new computationally based research methods and tools can we consider? And then what are the kind of urgent research questions? One of them, of course, is this issue of what is data? What do we mean by data? Something that, is information that is now in a kind of calculable or manipulable form, something that where we can do quantitative research on it. So what do we do with the information though, and how can we make it operationalizable? And what are the affordances and the new objects we create? And anyone who works with this kind of material, getting the data back for global currents, in fact, resulted in far more questions emerging than we had originally had. So we used big data to test feature modeling and feature extraction, and we designed algorithms that allowed us to do that. And from this, the curated data sets that we supplied, we are able to move to much larger, scale it up to much larger uncurated data sets, unstructured data. And so we focused on particular, you can see them on the left-hand side in the discovery column. We focused on things that I thought were particularly interesting about 12th century manuscript production. And we only, in fact, could complete 4 and never got to catchwords or capitula. But we did do capital letters, though we found that our categories for capital letters are inadequate to permit nuance in computational discovery. And so what we focused on were in large capitals on the illuminated, historiated and decorated initials on rubrics and on this intertextual space. Providing vast amounts of hand done. So here's the manual for you, the kind of hand done training data as PDFs, which were then put through the the innovated algorithms to create the return of our data points. These are, each of them is a kind of point on a manuscript folio. And you can see the numbers that were returned to us from this very small sort of data set. And that translated into 72,000 images, 15,000 literary notabiliores, 66,000 in large capitals, and so on. Okay, that's great, right? But then we had to create a means, a gallery, a means of accessing the information in visual form, as opposed to numerically. And we also had to create CSVs to allow us to kind of work between the material, relational databases. And other bits and pieces that we did just as trials were to look at plain capitals and liter notabiliores, as Mark Algie Hewitt did here, overlaid from 72,000 images. And you can see patterns emerge, density patterns emerge for where these things appear on the folio. And we also worked with galleries like this. It's very exciting. I love this, absolutely beautiful. No doubt about that. You can see where the computer made mistakes like this, thinks it's an O. I'm waving my cursor around in the sort of top third right. It's a hole in the manuscript, but the computer read it as an O. We were able to sort of sift these things out. What discoveries did we make? Well, the discoveries that we made to date are all through eye and knowledge of manuscript studies. So, for example, from a sample set of 254 H's, I was very interested in this one in the middle of the second row, this H with a shorter second limb, because I knew I'd seen it somewhere before. And I had to then go back through all of my notes from the last 20 years to find the H. That's Cambridge Corpus Christi College 312. That's the one that was returned. And then I eventually was able to match it up to Cambridge Trinity B1527 because I remembered seeing it in this Trinity manuscript. Is that exciting? Maybe it is, because the Trinity manuscript is not localized, where the Corpus Christi College Cambridge 3112 is localized. Could we use this kind of information to help us localize manuscripts? Because only about 27% of manuscripts, certainly up to about 1150, have a firm localization. So there's a huge amount of information that we still have to sift through to get some of the basic questions addressed, right? And then, hang on, I'm clicking on. So there were T's. The T's really interest me, but the lowest bottom right T, which is sort of Lombardic, interested me. It's quite, okay, I thought it was quite rare. Of course, I then remembered having seen it. This is also in Corpus 3112, and it is also in Trinity B1527. So I think there may be some really wonderful and useful connection here where we can take the information we know about one manuscript from these initials, do a much fuller paleographical analysis, and then be able to say something about the otherwise unlocalized and not very well studied Trinity manuscript. And then here are just some others that I found along the way, which I'm not going to dwell on. So in other words, it's really expanded. And in fact, I have people sending me examples of these T's and H's now, for which I'm very grateful. So this kind of work really helps us, you know, you can extract these features, you can do far more with them than we've been able to do to date. Ben Albritton is planning a new project that where he is going to see what more we can do with the very large data sets that we've got returned. And in the meantime, I've gone off to work on another project, also late 12th, early 13th century, which is about legibility. And this is really my sort of last category, even though I've got exchanging at the end that kind of folds into this. And this is the new project, Medieval Networks of Memory, which I co-direct with Dr. Mateusz Fafinski, who's at the University of Tübingen at the moment and will join Erfurt University in the new year. And Mateusz is responsible for all of the wonderful, amazing technology that I will show you. It is live, but it's on it's mounted on GitHub because of the sustainability of the platform, of the site and the data. And it's looking at religious houses through mortuary rolls and building on the work of Jean Dufour, which is absolutely fundamental in this field. So Medieval Networks of Memory, we have created an interactive map, color-coded interactive map of all of the religious houses, nearly 500 of them that were visited for two prioresses, Amphelisa of Leal Church and Lucy de Vere of Castle Hedingham, when they died in around 1215 to 1225. So these are two separate prioresses. A man gets on a horse with some membranes in his bag, knocks on the door of the religious institution in the sticks in the middle of nowhere and says, you know, write a condolence for Prioress Amphelisa of Leal Church. So they kind of write it out. And of course he visits, I think we have some 70 women's houses that were visited. And here it's about missing data. What is missing? You know, women scribes that are present in these roles that have never been kind of drawn out before. It isn't that they didn't exist. It's just that we don't really have evidence, named evidence, colophon evidence in the British record, and unlike the German record for women scribes. When in fact, you know, I think there are ways that this data, paleographically in particular, is showing us that we are talking about the undoubted representation of women scribes at this point, and probably on an everyday, mundane, mediocre basis. They just wrote wherever they were, they wrote. So this is also hosted by Stanford Text Technologies as we move, and that project is being sort of sunset, or at least kind of folded into Stanford Manuscript Sciences, where I'm collaborating with Ben Albritton in Green Library. So it's online, it's here. You can click on the material on the left-hand side in the bar, and you can look at the maps, you can look at the individual roles, you can work through the bibliography. And again, here is the map, and the question that I am currently working on is, can we quantify the aesthetic to recover the missing, by which I mean women scribes who are almost inevitably in the record described as having terrible handwriting. Can that, or clumsy, slovenly, bizarrely large, those are descriptions of other women scribes. Can we think about the issue of aesthetics to trace these absent writers? And this is the roll from St. John's College, 19 membranes. It's very long. I can't remember the exact number of feet, but it's 11 meters. So what's that, 30 something feet? At St. John's, it's absolutely remarkable. And here's the London Egerton manuscript, which is fully digitized. The St. John's is not fully digitized, the Egerton is. And Egerton is also, it's got this remarkable, beautiful depiction of Lucy de Vere at the front. And it's actually kept in two separate boxes in the British Library, which is odd. They have, you know, it's fragmented online, but they have also fragmented it in reality. So that's quite interesting. This is a Dufour static map, as it were. Jean Dufour's volumes of rouleaux mortuaires, really just extraordinary work, incredible. And he is, Dufour's work is always the basis for the material that we have gone on to develop in these multiple different ways. So you can see, if you click on the map, it'll take you to the specific place. It'll show you the titulus, or the condolence that was entered. And then there's also the transcription of it. And then you can work through the data. We have done a really very what's the word, detailed analysis of the paleography of each of these tituli. And that has allowed us to start working in R to clean the data and then to use a variety of packages, including UD pipe for tokenization, BTM for topic modeling, paired with our own sort of Latin stopwords collection. And topic modeling has allowed us to see the sort of significant similarity in the structure of the tituli. And then it's allowed us to begin to work in other ways now, which is where we're developing our work now in terms of the paleographical nuance of the various 500 hands. Here's a couple of them. These are from very small institutions, Monmouth and UES Harold, over on the in the West Midlands region of England, right on the border. So two very small houses. And then, you know, this is kind of how they look. And if you consider what I just said about women's handwriting as being clumsy, bizarrely large, slovenly, irregular, and so on, I think you could probably go through this role just with what I told you, and you could pick out instances of the handwriting, and not in every case by any means, but in a predominance of cases, they will be attributable to women's houses. This is not a coincidence. Here is one example. And this is because the women, I think it's fair to say that in many institutions, the women were not as well trained as scribes in some of the bigger institutions, but also as some of the male scribes in male houses. And obviously, as I say, you know, this is something that we're working on at the moment, but I'm pretty confident about some of these findings. And this is Wroxhall again, in the West Midlands. I also went to the UK in March and I've started visiting as many of these. I'm doing my own little pilgrimage to these 500 houses and almost 500 houses. And so far I've done something like maybe 40. It's going to take me a while. But it's really also interesting to see where those places were, to be in the physical landscape, where those places were. So this is one example of a woman's hand from Salisbury Psalter, and you can see the description that the finishing of the strokes is slovenly. It's not a trained scribe, and it may have been a nun, say the Sisums, but they never returned to that tentative declaration. So we can do all sorts of things with the data. I'm coming to a close now. All sorts of things with the data, density maps. We can look at the number of lines according to gender. We can look at the number of lines according to the institution. We can track the geographical distribution of the paleographical features, which is very, very exciting. There's a lot going on in Lincolnshire, and the other stuff that I'm working on is also to do with Lincolnshire. So that's a coincidence. And Mateusz Fafinski himself is working on what he's calling scriptscape, so the way that script maps onto the landscape. And in our most recent work, we took some of the most cutting edge paleographical features at around sort of 1220, the things that were the newest in paleography. And we're looking at their distribution according to the female houses and the male houses. And if my theory about the training of women scribes is right, then it's perhaps no surprise to see that women's houses, as you can see from these, I don't know what this kind of map is called, this flumpy map, graph rather, these you know, troughs and peaks, you can see that women's houses are more conservative in terms of their paleographical features, and these are then can be broken down by the types of institutions, so we can begin to think about religious networks and so on. So finally, we have a lot of other stuff that we're doing with this about exploring scripts computationally and thinking about new approaches to what constitutes a hand or script. And for this period, it's very exciting because it's a period of great change in script in England, Wales, and Scotland. Can we identify diagnostic features for women's hands, which I think we can? And through various kinds of segmentation, we can think about space, and we can think about individual paleographical forms being extracted. Automatedly is the ideal, isn't it? So that we don't have to do what I was doing with the T's and the H's, the manuscripts from the other projects that I was talking about. So I think, you know, these are some of the new directions, this expanding, enhancing, extracting, exploring, and exchanging old models for new models, exchanging old ways of describing things as irregular and ugly and slovenly, these value judgments that are actually inappropriate for pre sort of 1800 efforts in handwriting and manuscript production, and just new ways of thinking about some of the materials that, as I've suggested, are accessible in a variety of different ways and places, and upon which so much work still remains to be done. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Treharne. That was wonderful presentation. I will be doing the shifting over to the moderation because unfortunately Jim isn't able to join us, which is our fault, I have to say, on CDHI. He came into the Zoom under another name and was booted, and we can't enter him back in without shutting the whole system down, the whole meeting. And of course, we don't want to do that. So our apologies to you, Dr. Treharne, and to Jim as well. But the plus side of doing a Zoom meeting as opposed to doing a Zoom webinar is that we do have an opportunity now to have a conversation and for people to ask you questions directly. That's one of the advantages of having the registration system that we do have. So what I would love to do is open the floor for questions, and also invite you to raise your hand through the reactions function on the bottom of your screen, where there's a raise hand function, and I can call on you. And also, if you'd rather just put your question in the chat and have one of us go ahead and read it, we're happy to do that as well. So I see several hands have gone up, which is super wonderful. And let me call on Adam first. Dr. Cohen, please unmute and chat.
Thank you. Thank you. Elaine, that was a magisterial presentation, so rich, and Stephanie's put that in the chat box. There is so much to ponder. And I think what's especially impressive is the way you find that wonderful balance between broad theoretical concerns and the nitty-gritty of coding and so on and so forth, and really marry those together so beautifully. So this stimulates a big question that I've been mulling over, and I want to entice you to speak perhaps to something that didn't come up explicitly in your talk, and that has to do with some of the engines that continue to drive the choices we make. And I'm referring specifically to questions of nationalism that help fund some of these huge digitization projects that form the backbone of what we piggyback on. And you know, the extent to which we're just continuing to perpetuate, despite all of our small efforts, that there are larger threads here that we don't have control over that are still driving the conversation. So.
Sorry, lost my cursor there to unmute. Well, you know, you've hit the nail on the head there, really, haven't you, in terms of major collaboration and thinking about concerted ways to take action or to bring together really kind of disparate or very sort of different corpora through repositories around the world. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you totally. And in fact, you know, I do lots of work with Orietta Derald in Cambridge and Andrew Prescott in Glasgow, and colleagues in Europe, and it's really difficult to find funding that would allow you to easily cross those national divides, as it were, those continental divides. And especially when you're talking about digitized materials, online materials, or perhaps not even so much the images, but the metadata behind them, because there's no need for you to be in a specific place to do, you know, you don't have to necessarily have 6 weeks in London or something to do that. This is something that really can be done by colleagues remotely. So I think, you know, it's worth trying to make a kind of big call, perhaps. I don't know if there can be some, if the professional associations can get involved in trying to persuade the funders to think more internationally, more globally, even as they're asking us to be more global in our work, or at least more comparative or more internationally accessible. more respectful of the world's cultural record, I think it would be a really great thing if we could kind of, I don't know, be more persuasive with the funders. Then on the other hand, at the same time as we say that, with Brexit, that's British institutions out of European funding. Apparently the UK government is going to give them the equivalent, but we'll have to wait and see if that happens. But no, I think you're absolutely right, Adam. Thank you so much for that point, that really significant point. That would be one of the fastest motivators, I think, for big collaborative teamwork.
There's also, I know some of my colleagues at University of Toronto have had challenges in supporting institutions in the global south, where it might be possible to get a PI involved with the grant, but getting funding to support their graduate students to, for example, come to Toronto or what have you, or there's an expectation that the institutions will be carrying that cost, which is just not possible for many institutions outside the ones we were just talking about. So great question, Adam. All right, Sarah, may I ask you to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Elaine. That was really inspiring as ever. You've got so many exciting projects on the go. I just wondered what you thought about like the use of like Team Pigment that Richard Gamerson is working on, whether you think there's any potential there for, because there's some Oxford manuscripts that I look at, and I would really like Team Pigment to analyse them to see if they can see relationships between the types of pigments and possibly match up manuscripts that way. And I just sort of wondered whether you thought those kind of like heritage science projects are going to be significant in the future, or if they're quite niche.
Yeah, I don't think, well, I love that idea that there's something niche in manuscript studies, Sarah. niche. Okay, so within the confines of our understanding of manuscript studies, I don't think they will be any more niche than the kinds of work that I've been showing you, other kinds of feature extraction or different kinds of computational analyses. The scientific side of things, I think, is actually ramping up right now. We have regular visitors to our Slack, which is the equivalent of the Hadron Collider, it's something linear, something accelerator thing. Where they come and they do that multispectral imaging. It's where the Archimedes Codex text was discovered by Neville Retz, my colleague in classics. So I think that we will see more of that. And in fact, that's a really good question, because when we worked on global currents, it became really apparent to us how important colour is. It's silly, perhaps a silly thing to say, but also that it's possible. And this was out of global currents grew an idea with Mateusz Fafinski and Mohamed Sheriat, who's at ETS in Montreal, a project called Global Hues, HUES, which was using multispectral and terahertz imaging to analyze color and the spectra of color in medieval manuscripts, where there is such a kind of profound density of color and often a regularity of the coloration, and then to deploy it in modern computational assessment of color. So automated assessment of color through automated tagging of pictures and images and so on. And that has genuine accessibility potential for people who are have different sight abilities, right? Different abilities, vision abilities.
Yeah.
So I think it's I don't think it's niche at all. I think it's a really interesting exploration of what we can deduce through scientific method. And again, I think of the work that Orietta Derold and her team are doing at Cambridge, and they're doing all kinds of amazing stuff with imaging and early textual materials.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Michael.
Hello, and thank you so much, Dr. Treharne, for a fascinating presentation, which I think covers so many directions that is of great interest to all of us. My question concerns how you choose your documents, the documents on which you work, because one I presume that it's obligatory to have comparative material. So how do you know where to find it? And that is linked to a question that I'm trying to work on at the moment, which is linking databases. I wonder whether you have any experience with that, in that there are so many databases out there, and we would like to know what other people have. And the more we can link to them, the easier it will be for us to carry on our research. I was trying, as you were showing us your images, I was trying to see, well, where are these documents coming from? You showed them in various places, and I presume that it's because you had been there before. Was there somewhere that you could go to find what you were looking for, or was it pretty haphazard?
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, this is in terms of critical practice, this is surely, it's got to be in the sort of top three, hasn't it? How we access materials, textual materials, and when we can access various databases and repositories, what is it that we're accessing and how usable is it? So usability is another issue. For us, so the most important thing is open access material. And we were lucky to be able to use Parker on the Web images, IIIF images. So the IIIF initiative, the International Image Interoperability Framework, is probably one of the most significant initiatives globally now. It's all kind of cultural heritage, museums and galleries, as well as libraries and archives. And they are creating standards, they are creating sustainable, interoperable standards for data. So that creates in and of itself huge possibilities for scholars around the world. And a lot of this material is open access, not all of it. Not every repository has signed up, but they should, one could argue. What you did, so we had that material, we had those IIIF images, and we were able then we just picked them by date, Michael. We just picked, I wanted 12th century stuff, and it could be anything, it could be French, Latin, English. Language didn't matter, because we were interested in letter forms and modes of information retrieval. But it's a broader question. So IIIF and open access, but work like Mark Faulkner's Searo Bend, which is bringing together actually some quite old databases that are non-functional now, but were very useful and publicly funded. That kind of work to create linked data, to clean up the early data in particular and make it operable now, is very significant. So where you find it, when we did cybertext, we used the CDLI, which is the cuneiform database for our cuneiform analyses. They've got thousands of cuneiforms and you can analyze, and they've done all the metadata. However, it's not, and this is a conglomerative database, it points you out to the repositories that have different categories of metadata. So, here we got a comment actually directly to this, which is by Leah Frost. Leah, if you're there, producing discovery consistent. Wow, that's great. She working on a project producing consistent discovery metadata for the manuscripts in the Vatican Library, which is digitizing their own manuscripts, but their metadata is extremely spotty and inconsistent. Actually, their descriptions, what they're doing is just getting it out there, right? So there are now currently, or at least this time last year, there were 40 million images on the Vatican's open access site. 40 million. It's mind-boggling, and it was proposed by somebody in a talk last year. I'm sorry, I could get you the reference somewhere in my files, who works for the British Library, and that person said that only 5% of the culture of the kind of known and accessible cultural record in Western institutions is open access and online. 5%. And I'm already like, when I'm looking for a T, that's a lot of images. Can't look through 40 million images for that T. So automation of this material is a real desideratum, as is indeed discoverability, as you point out, Michael, and it's very, very tricky. There are lots of resources that try to bring together the materials that we can use online. And I think particularly of Sian Eckard's pages. She's at the University of British Columbia in the Department of English, ECHARD, Sian Eckard, trained at Toronto, amazing medievalist, and her web pages are something else. And she spends a lot of time kind of bringing this material together to the one place. So that's where I would start for looking to see what's available if you're a medievalist in the Western tradition.
I am. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Leah, for your additional points. So the project's very much in progress, and you'll be able to create your own IIIS manuscripts. And wow.
Yes, yeah, it's an interactive project. We have a couple of features, one of which is called the community catalog, and it allows users to submit their own more detailed descriptive metadata. And the other one is called Scholars Workbench, and it's what allows for people to annotate images and use them alongside the whatever in the images that we have. Yeah, I work in the Vatican Film Library at St. Louis University, so we have about 37,000 manuscripts on microfilm, and we're working on methodically digitizing them. And it's been slow going because of budget and staff reasons, but I do think it's really interesting to think about the microfilm as artifact. My predecessor in this role told me when I started to remember, you're not digitizing manuscripts, but you're digitizing microfilms. But I have a colleague who's doing a project on blank spaces, and it depends on using EBO images, early English books online, to sort these images into black and white pixels. And I thought a lot about it during this talk. So that helped to sort of clarify for me that one thing that we can do with projects like the one I work on, we don't have the pretty colors, but we let you scribble on them. And we also offer a platform for other types of investigation. Like the project that my colleague is doing would not work on manuscripts like it does on print books, but somebody might come up with something else. So I thought this was really fascinating, and it's very much germane to my interests as a digitization and manuscript librarian.
Well, and thank you for all the work that you do and the work that you're doing. It sounds absolutely wonderful. And Sebastian, thank you for putting into the chat Sian's web pages. Thanks. But they're really, it's an amazing, long-standing project that she has over at UBC there that she does on her own. And Leah, thank you for the work that you're doing at the with the microfilms. And in fact, it's really interesting. So talking to Andrew Prescott again, Andrew was saying to me that he strongly believes that it's working directly with the image. The capability, for example, of Mirador, which was developed to work with IIIF images, but its capability of saving the annotations in a usable format that students or scholars make it's not stable, let's put it that way. And so there are other modes of doing that, as you point out, Leah, and other formats, like I think it's called From the Page or something like that. It's another tool that scholars can use, and to make those annotations and that knowledge that scholars bring to their work to make it accessible to all, I think is would be a real step forward. Let's put it that way. Thank you.
Well, we have room for about one more question. Does anyone want to jump in? We're going to be concluding at 5:30 this afternoon to accommodate an engagement that Dr. Treharne has at 5:30 our time in Toronto. No. Well,
I see a hand actually. Is it?
Oh,
Liza's got her
Oh,
hand
thank you, Liza. Yeah, please jump in. Thanks.
You can feel free to ignore this if this is not helpful, but one theme I noticed in your talk was getting grant funding and getting all the stuff you needed right as the funding ran out. And I have had that experience myself, as I think everyone has who's had a grant, right, where all of the good stuff happens right where the funding ends. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how do you manage that? Like, do you factor for the timing being a lie when you submit the grant and try to save some back? Like, do you just end up working sort of for free after the grant is over? How does that work if you're paying people out of the grant? Because course you can keep going to someone with a permanent job, but your team can't. Do you have sort of thoughts on how to manage that, or how to write better grant proposals in the future to sort of think about that as well?
So that, I mean, that is such an important issue and such a critically important prompt to remind us to build into our grants some way of, I don't know, like rolling over a bit of money or asking the institution for a small amount of matched funding at the end. I mean, is that realistic? I don't know. It is true of every single major project, big collaborative project that I've done in the last 17 years, the EM 1060 to 1220 project, Global Currents, Cybertext, and not so much medieval networks of memory, because that's kind of piecemeal funded, right? That at that critical moment, you know, we had to make decisions that were really exigent, where you thought you would come back and you'd be able to do X, Y, and Z. And with the M1060, we launched a beta version, we made corrections, but its functionality isn't as good as the site that Orietta built, all, you know, from the very beginning. With the Global Currents, we have this amazing amount of data. It's actually open access, available. But you have to know what to do with it, because when it came back with those many hundreds of thousands of images, it's overwhelming. And it's to that point that really the grant should start, right? So there should be two-part grants. Does the NEH do this, or Mellon? I don't know. You can get follow-on funding from somewhere, but I can't remember where. I think it's probably the single most important point that you're making, or maybe the faculty person gets an immediate sabbatical at the end of the grant, right? Because you definitely, when you're doing grant work, it's no sabbatical, right? Even if you get some kind of diminution in other responsibilities, which we tend not to. So that, I mean, but again, you know, we need to lobby. So our professional associations, our senior managers, we need to lobby for this, because digital work, as everyone on this call knows, is not like sitting down to write a book. They're completely different. They're completely different things, with different methodologies and different outcomes and different resources. I feel very optimistic today, because you've all been so kind.
Thanks
I think,
very much.
you know, yes, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, you're making comments to the right person, because not only am I the Associate VP Research for LISA, but I'm also the University of Toronto's representative to SSHRC. So it's really great to hear these comments. But I want to thank you so much, Dr. Treharne, for your fantastic lecture this afternoon. It was really, really wonderful and lovely, wonderful work. And it's fantastic to get such a rich map of where the field is, where it's going. And as others have said, you know, bringing together theoretical frameworks with, you know, the haptic and the digital is really just completely lovely. So a real pleasure to listen to this amazing talk, and many thanks for all of you who have come to listen to the talk, and really appreciate your attendance today. And please do join us in the future for other events with CDHI.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.